Hello, hello. This is Moshe Landman with the Maryland Green Party running for the U.S. Senate 2024. Welcome, welcome. Let's just get a little country music in before we get started. Okay, today, this evening, we're going to talk about the United States environment, pollution, and climate. Obviously, with the Green Party, this is considered the most important issue. Once we finish all of our nonsense with war, poverty, discrimination, inequality, economic inequality, we will finally get to the real issue, which is the climate. Climate change is the gravest environmental, social, and economic peril that humanity has ever met. Across the world, it is causing vanishing polar ice, melting glaciers, growing deserts, stronger storms, rising oceans, less biodiversity, deepening droughts, as well as more disease, hunger, strife, and human misery. It is a tragedy unfolding in slow motion. Greenhouse gases warm the earth by trapping heat in the atmosphere. Carbon dioxide, methane, nitric oxide, and more. Methane, of course, many times more than CO2. Much of that heat is initially absorbed by the ocean, creating roughly a 30-year delay in the impact of that heat at the surface of the planet. Actually, it's around 90% of the greenhouse gases are absorbed in the ocean. That's going to have a huge effect. To return to a safe level of greenhouse gases in Earth's atmosphere, we must reduce atmospheric greenhouse gases, currently at 420 parts per million, or ppm, as quickly as possible to levels that existed before 1980, 350 parts per million carbon dioxide or less. And then we must continue to reduce CO2 levels until they reach a balanced state between 250 and 350 parts per million. Greens support science-based policies to curb climate change. We have an ambitious plan to make drastic changes quickly to avert a global catastrophe. We will expend maximum effort to preserve a planet friendly to life as we know it by curtailing greenhouse gas emissions and actively removing greenhouse gases from the atmosphere. We should enact an emergency Green New Deal to turn the tide on climate change, revive the economy, and make wars for oil obsolete. Initiate a World War II scale national mobilization to halt climate change, the greatest threat to humanity in our history. Create 20 million jobs by transitioning to 100% clean, renewable energy by 2030 and investing in public transit, sustainable agriculture, conservation and restoration of critical infrastructure, including ecosystems. Implement a just transition that empowers those communities and workers most impacted by climate change and the transition to a green economy. Ensure that any worker displaced by the shift away from fossil fuels will receive full income and benefits as they transition to alternative work. Enact energy democracy based on public, community, and worker ownership of our energy system. Treat energy as a human right. Redirect research funds from fossil fuels into renewable energy and conservation. Build a nationwide smart grid, a smart electricity grid that can pool and store power from a diversity of renewable sources, giving the nation clean and democratically controlled energy. End destructive energy extraction associated infrastructure, fracking, tar sands, offshore oil drilling, oil trains, mountaintop removal. Oh, that's terrible. Natural gas pipelines and uranium mines. Halt any investment in fossil fuel infrastructure, including natural gas. Phase out all fossil fuel power plants. End all subsidies for fossil fuels. That's a big one, especially for big oil, Exxon, Chevron, all of them, and impose a greenhouse gas fee tax to charge polluters for the damage they have created. The strict comprehensive protections of the Clean Air Act must be maintained and enhanced if we are to keep in place effective federal programs that deal with urban smog, toxic air pollution, acid rain, and ozone depletion. State and local clean air initiatives should advance and improve national efforts. For example, moving forward with stricter clean air standards and the conversion of all American vehicles and fleets to clean electric energy. So there's a lot to talk about here. Again, the environment, the number one issue for the Greens. We're dealing with the understanding, finally, from science that we as human beings are having a dramatic effect on the climate. Before we even talk about the carbon dioxide, I want to talk about the soil. It may be a bigger problem than even the fossil fuels, because the tilling and the mass production of monoculture farming, specifically soy, corn, wheat, is destroying our soil. The topsoil, that 6 inches, is critical. We must have that soil to be rich, diverse, with especially the rhizomes, the mushrooms, which actually they help trees communicate with each other. I don't know if you know this, trees have intelligence. We're coming to realize that they are life forms. So we've cut down all the trees. The trees are critical carbon sinks. Then we've stripped the land. Now the soil, every year we're tilling it, we're ripping it apart and destroying it. We're turning soil into sand. Every year, so much, I don't even want to talk about the number of acres that is being destroyed of productive soil, and that is becoming it's dead. It can no longer grow anything from grasses to food and etc. So it's a huge, this problem has actually started from the beginning of America. The Native Americans, on the other hand, who lived here for 10,000 years. Again, we've been here for 400 years. They've been here for 10,000. They came up through China, all around, over the Bering Strait. The ancestors of our current Native Hispanic Americans all across. They understood how to live in balance with nature. They preserved. The buffalo was spiritual and very important to them. They always planted so that they can use all parts of the tree and the animal of the buffalo into teepees, etc. And then even their agriculture was regenerative. So it was embedded within the forest. They would plant. They used to burn the coal, and they knew how to use that as fertilizer. No nitrogen, like the way we have these toxic fertilizers that are seeping into the water source, and then they're going down and creating algal blooms and destroying all the oxygen is gone from the waterways. So in order for us to rebuild our soils, we have to have a totally new way of thinking about agriculture. We need to think about agriculture in a holistic manner, permaculture agriculture, where we're planting food forests, including trees, shrubs, herbs, and then the root level. And that's not the way multinational agricultural companies do it. They just mass produce one thing, which destroys the soil over time. They know it, and that's why they have to move on, buy more land, and plant somewhere else. Land is becoming scarce, and that's why Bill Gates, for example, is buying up all this agricultural land. Maybe he is someone we can talk to implement these new ideas. We do have a conservation program on the federal level, which encourages those to replant trees, and they get some payment for that. But it's certainly not enough. We need a massive initiative across the United States to actually grow and replant 30% more trees than we have today. Can you imagine? The number is staggering. It's something like from 220 billion to 300. I have that on the site here now. So we need to go ahead and do this massive tree planting campaign. I don't know if anyone knows about Israel, but when it was founded, it was basically desert. The pioneers came and they replanted trees, Jewish National Fund. So that's a good model here for the United States. Now Israel's like this leading, oasis, this amazing oasis in the desert, where we've got these agricultural farms and blooming areas because they rebuilt the soil from scratch. First, they planted the trees that builds up the soil's capacity to hold water, and then all these bugs and worms get in there, and then the rhizomes, etc. So America today has 228 billion trees. We need to get to 300 billion plus. We need to plant all across. Not everywhere does it need to be a forest. In the mid areas of the country, it could be a different kind of ecosystem, where you have the plains, where animals roam through, and it's more grasses. So we have to understand that each area requires a different type of community, of agricultural community, whether that's deciduous. We also don't want to put invasive species. It's a big thing now. Invasive species are not meant to be in a certain area, and then they destroy the other plants and they take over. So you need to know which plants are made to be in the right areas. Some will cause blight, disease. So all across America, though, if you look at our chart here on the documents page, you'll see just a massive gap on the East Coast, first of all, Florida, and then in the entire middle of the country, and then many in the West Coast too, in California. So that's a huge, huge initiative. In terms of the climate, in terms of carbon dioxide emissions, we have an emergency situation. We need to basically stop all fossil fuels, all the burning of carbon dioxide, and even more so methanes and the higher producing, certainly the hydrofluorocarbons and the HFCs, and all those issues that we know that from the refrigerants, etc. Those are just like 10,000 times what carbon dioxide is. So those have to be removed carefully. And now I think the companies are understanding that they need to all be replaced. So anywhere with the Freon and all of those refrigerants that use HFCs and the predecessor to that have to be removed carefully by those who are experts in that field, and then you make sure you do not just throw it out in the ground. And then let's get rid of that as a refrigerant and try these new technologies that are not made of these extreme greenhouse gases, hydrofluorocarbons. Now, the next worst thing, methane, like from the cows and the burps. Apparently the burps are very bad. And then you have also methane coming out of landfills, 10 times or more than the CO2s, but they don't last as long in the air. And then the carbon dioxide. So how do we go from 420 back down to 350, 300? We have to stop emitting, and then we have to sink. We have to do these carbon sinks. California is working on all this new technology that pulls carbon out of the air, brings it into the water, or actually just pulls it. But that's very expensive, and we have a natural solutions. That is trees and forests. Those are carbon sinks. Actually, the soil itself is actually even a greater sink than the trees. So if you look at our green party at the bottom of the page, I feel like I'm in synagogue here. Let's go down to the bottom of the page, please. And you have vegetation. Then, for example, boreal forests, you have almost 5 times as much carbon that sinks into the soil underneath those kind of forests. Temperate grasslands. Look at this. For every 7 or so gigatons that's taken up by the grasslands, 236 is absorbed by the soil underneath. So you may think in those middle grasslands of the United States, those are not great for the climate and the carbon sinks. It's not true. They're actually massive carbon sinks. It's the soil. And that's part of the problem when we destroy the soil through tilling and all of these non-regenerative sources. Now that soil cannot hold carbon. So it's a double. It kills two birds, God forbid. You're on the one hand, you're destroying our agriculture, and on the other hand, we're destroying the soil underneath, which is the great carbon sink. And then you have the wetlands. The wetlands, for every 43 above ground, you have 643 underneath the ground. Peat. So there's areas like in New Orleans, around Louisiana, where you have swamplands, and in Florida, those swamps with the mangroves are massive, massive carbon sinks. Not necessarily on the top. Mangroves are a pretty sink, but they pull it into the peat into the soil underneath them to the tune of almost 15 times as much carbon is sunk. So if we can create more of those and make sure we preserve all of the swamps, especially in the Floridas, Everglades, we make sure we cannot use those lands. We got to make sure we preserve them and more. So that's a great and a critical area. And there's this movement called to save the soil. It's this guru in India who is going around the world he actually figured this out almost 30 years ago, that the soils were being depleted around the world. And he's been running around the world trying to tell everyone to be conscious of that. Areas such as from the strip from Ethiopia all the way across all of Africa. But for the United States, it's mainly in the Midwest. So where the Great Plains area, and then in California, on where they grow most of the almonds and a lot of our food, that area is becoming dangerously soil depleted. Okay. What else do we have to discuss? They talk about the Green New Deal. Well, the Democrats, I guess, AOC and some of the congressmen have also been talking about it. It's funny, I can't even remember the senator I only remember AOC and not the senator from that she's working with over in Connecticut. But be that as it may, we can create millions and millions of jobs for renewable energy, investing in public transit. So For those who can, if you want to go and let go of if you're going to be able to move towards an electric car, that's a great thing. If we can we're all going to do that in Maryland. We're going to build out the electric charging infrastructure, which is critical, and make sure it's faster. People don't want to wait 30 minutes to charge a car. We need to do so in maybe 5-10 minutes, at least for 100 miles. And hopefully, as Maryland is doing in California, we're going to entirely replace the gasoline-based car system. Companies like Mercedes-Benz already have quite a few vehicles. Tesla, obviously. But let's get the lower-cost cars there so everybody can have it. We've got to incentivize Ford and others to build these cars. And this whole idea that we're gonna basically force the Japanese and the others not to be able to build here. I'm not sure that's the best idea. The Chinese, the Indians. That's gonna stifle trade. It's not necessarily. Remember, Nissan, Toyota, they build cars here now. Acura is an entirely American-based company that's owned by Japanese, but it's all built here. So I don't believe we should limit the global community from building electric vehicles. We can just incentivize them to build it here, so we have American jobs. They seem to know how to do it better. That's why they're building. That's why they're the highest-selling cars, the most units like Toyota and Honda. So let's just incentivize them to build the electric vehicles here and provide jobs. Batteries, if we want to, mine all that lithium, but it's not so concerning for me that it's here. Like Mr. Manchin said, that meanwhile he's the one in West Virginia that's blowing the tops off of all these mountains to get the coal. So I don't know if he belongs even in the Democratic Party. Be that as it may, that is the Green New Deal. So this transition to clean energy will require millions of jobs, and it can be public-private partnerships, so we can employ all these people who are currently unemployed on welfare on the SNAP food program. They can be cleaning our water, working on the electric grid, and we do need much faster, higher power transmission lines. Bill Gates is working on that as well. China's creating this entire network of super fast electric energy transmission lines. So we're going to need those to move the electricity around from the solar, the wind, and the clean energy sources. But all of these are going to create the possibility of many jobs. New York is actually starting to become a leader in the green movement as well, and they're moving to zero emissions too, which is kind of hard to believe with New York. When you used to pass by on the way to New York and New Jersey, the smell of oil and sulfur was terrible, and so that's what I remember from New York. Continuing down, fracking, the idea that we're going to take this oil out of the rock. They know how to do it, but it's a double whammy of terribleness. Why? Number one, you're going in, you're ripping up those rocks that will leach these toxic chemicals into the water. And then, of course, there's no more fossil fuels being burned and creating global warming. But it's that ripping apart and the way they leach it through these chemicals that get into the water that's even more dangerous. Tar sands, also bad. Offshore drilling, we've seen what happens. They almost always leak at some point. And then it's the terrible. We've seen so many spills and offshore leaking, and all the animals die, and the water's destroyed, and it takes years to clean it up. It's never fully cleaned. It's just a disaster. So let's just stop. It's enough. Mountaintop removal, like in Kentucky, and if you just do Google Map for me, please. West Virginia and Kentucky, you'll see all these areas, these patches all over. These looks like sand patches. Those are mountaintop removal. They just ripped apart. They cut off the top of the mountains to get the coal, and what's left is destroyed ecosystems. You can never plant that soil back. It has to be completely rebuilt from scratch, because the soil is destroyed almost forever. Okay. And the Clean Air Act. So I know that Biden and his team have done a lot of good things, and the bipartisan infrastructure bill and their climate legislation has moved, as long as it continues with the situation now. But it's not enough. We have to move even further, and we need support, and we need a whole movement towards this end. I hope you'll support the green movement. This is our number one issue, but we have many other issues. We'll continue on with our series. Let us know if you have any questions, and have a wonderful evening. Thanks.